Hey, welcome to the One Piece at a Time Distilling Institute with your host, the alchemist of Indiana's Black Forest, Alan Bishop. Hey, this channel is all about home distilling and legal distilling. If you've got questions, reach out to us in the comments below, social media, or via bishopshomegrown@gmail.com. And don't forget to check out thealchemistcabinet.com. Hey, what's up, guys? Time for another One Piece at a Time talking head video. And sorry I haven't been around as much the past week or so here, but October was incredibly busy. And we had our family, friends Halloween party this past weekend. That was a good time, and I broke my drinking fast, and worked out okay because Sunday I surprisingly did not have a hangover. But now let's see if we can go 6 months instead of 5 months without getting too deep into the bottle, right? And not because of having any issues with drinking or anything, but because sometimes you just need a clear head and a sober mind to focus on some other goals that you have in life, which I've been doing through the bike through it stuff I've been doing, riding my bicycle and everything. And normally this time of night, this coming up on twilight, getting home from work, I'd be out there riding the bike trying to get my miles in before it got too dark to ride. But I somehow managed to screw up both of my bikes at the same time. So my Abraxas bike, the front brake mechanism's kind of screwed up, so I'm going to have to replace that. And Hecate, I managed to break a spoke and bend the rim somehow. I'm still not entirely sure how I did that. Of course, they're original vintage rims. That's a 1972 bike. It's going to happen, right? But you know, it's fine. I rode the exercise bike yesterday down in the Alchemist cabinet. I'll ride it again tonight, and I'll get over 1,000 calories, and it'll be just fine. But it's not nearly as much fun, in my opinion. So, it is what it is. In other news, so new episodes of If You Have Ghosts, You Have Everything, our paranormal, supernatural, preternatural, high strangeness, Fortean podcasts are out now. And we've got more episodes coming. There's one actually going to be uploaded. Tonight is Tuesday evening, so it'll be uploaded this evening. There's some short episodes coming up. I didn't get to do a lot of spooky season episodes like we normally do in October. So I have some little short segments I'm going to do, including I might read, I've been writing some fairy tales. I'm not sure where those are going to end up at. As you guys know, I've got the Practical Distillers and Alchemist Almanac that I put stuff like that in quite often. And then I have this book, you know, Advice for Sovereign Distillers. It's going to be the limited edition we talked about. And then I've also got this little novella thing that I've been working on for about a year now. And so now I started writing these alcohol and history related fairy tales about the Black Forest of Southern Indiana. And I'm not sure where those are going to land. Some of them might land on the show, some might land in the Almanac, and some might land in its own book. We'll see. We'll see. I like writing. I enjoy writing. And as long as you guys support that, I'll continue to do it. Speaking of that, the 2026 Practical Distillers and Alchemist Almanac should be on its way to us anytime now. It was going through binding the other day. It takes a little while for them to put that stuff together and then get it out to us, but it should be coming to us anytime. It will be to most of you before the end of the year. Orders will be available soon, but I will not put up orders until I have physical copies in hand, because last year we ran into some shipping issues with them getting books to us and a couple of shipments of books getting lost and people having to wait for a long time to get their books, and I don't want to do that to you guys. I want to know that I have them in hand and all that shipping is on our end to take care of, not somebody else that we're waiting around on. So they are coming. I'm incredibly proud of it. It's still going to be out before the end of the year, thankfully. Next year we know that we need to have it done even a month or two earlier than I did this year, which is okay because I've actually already started on it for 2027. And I've got quite a bit of it done for 2027. So we might be starting to find a rhythm here, right? Year 4, going into year 4 of an almanac. So anyways, let's get into some of your questions and see what we got this evening. So this is from Terry. Good evening, Alan. Feliz Dia de los Muertos. Thank you. Happy Day of the Dead. Yes, and we do celebrate. I celebrate the Day of the Dead in my own way here. You know, for anyone who followed me on social media, you saw that I went down and visited my grandparents' graves. And I go out of my way to visit graves of people who have influenced me or inspired me over the years. And the Day of the Dead is every bit as important spiritually, even though I'm not of that background. It's every bit as important spiritually to me as what Halloween is. And it's something I think more people should pay attention to. You know, the Latino folks are very good at paying tribute to their dead. and it's something that we could all learn from tremendously. There's always something to learn. So, real quick question. I have a chiller to cool down my rum wash. It's 50 foot of 1/2 inch copper. I was thinking about using it for a flake stand coil. I was told it was too small. What would be the smallest size of pipe you would use in a flake stand? I want to make that rye mash you mentioned. Stay out of trouble, Terry. One love, live it. Appreciate that, brother. So 1/2 inch is pretty small. I'd have to look and see what the smallest worm I have is for which still it is that I have. Typically, I'm going to go probably 3/4 inch is what I'm going to use. And actually, that's a little big for a lot of things. 1/2 inch might work on smaller stills, like 5s and 10s and things of that nature. The thing that you always got to be cognizant of is that you want a little extra room in that worm, because that worm, you don't have a proper air outlet on it, so you want it to be a little larger to allow gases to escape, so you're not building pressure, A, and B, also because, as we talked about with the tension temperature and things of that nature, you want to actually off-gas some of those volatiles that you don't want to keep in your distillate. So you always want to keep that in mind in terms of worm size. Now, I'm not a still engineer, but Wayne Herbert at Ozark Steelworks is, and he would be a good person to ask this question. And Wayne, if you see this, chime in the comments below on YouTube and let us know what your opinion is on that. But great question, man, and thank you for the Happy Day of the Dead. I really appreciate that. So let's go to this next question here. So this is from Will. My question is about legal distillers using a pot still for the spirit run, like in Scotch whiskey. Those large distillers must, by law, use a spirit safe. In the safe, they can test the proof and move the output to the collection area. In the U.S., for distillers that use a pot still to make bourbon, the legal high limit is 160 proof. When you can't taste it, you have to rely on the hydrometer to make cuts. Obviously, everything from beginning to end goes into the vat for barreling. Home distillers might use a parrot. What is the typical proof range for wide cut bourbon and for narrow cut bourbon? Do the cuts have to be ultra narrow for smooth white dog? I assume that commercial distillers use much wider cuts and let the barrel fix it. As always, I appreciate your One Piece at a Time podcast. This is a great set of questions, and I'm going to answer it to the best of my ability. So, large distillers in the U.S. do not have to use a spirit safe that is locked and keeps them from accessing the spirit. They're able to access the spirit while they are distilling. They've been able to do that since 82, 83, somewhere in there, whenever deregulation happened. It used to be you had to have an excise agent on hand at all times, and he was armed and all that stuff. That's been gone for a long time. So the big distillers, they can assess their spirit as they distill off of the run. As a matter of fact, you go to a lot of tours in Kentucky, they'll let you taste the white spirit, try the white spirit, even at the big guys. I've had them do that several times. So, but yes, when back in the day you couldn't do that, it would have been a real pain in the ass. So you ask in the U.S. for distillers to use a pot still to make bourbon, the legal high limit is 160 proof. So I also want to state here, so you guys understand, and I'm not doubting that you do, but that a legal high limit of 160 proof doesn't mean the highest proof that comes off the still during the run. That means the average of the hearts at the end of the run, right? So you still might be running at 165, 170, something like that when it starts up, but it's dropping off as it goes. As long as the hearts that you collect on average are not over 160, still bourbon, still golden. When you can't taste it, you have to rely on the hydrometer to make cuts, obviously for wide cut and for narrow cut bourbon. All right, so here's where it gets interesting too. And you're talking pot still. The only time anyone would ever make clean cuts for bourbon or for whiskey in general, the only time you'd ever make very, very, very clean cuts is if you're going into a small barrel and you're trying to rapidly age. Clean cut whiskeys do not mature correctly in the barrel. You got to remember that those compounds that you find offensive in that white dog, when you're cutting wide, do not remain to be the same compounds that come back out of the barrel after maturation. They transform via a type of alchemy, via interactions with one another and esterification and oxidation in the barrel and contact with char and with toast and sugar, etc. If you try to make a very clean cut bourbon that you're going to put into a full-size barrel and age for any amount of time or mature for any amount of time, that barrel is going to eat all of the positive aspects of that distillation, all the positive aspects of that raw material that you started with, right? And if we're going to say that mash bills are important and that yeast is important, then we have to understand that those things have to be able to be maintained to some degree throughout the maturation process, or else there is no real fingerprint that makes bourbon any kind of particular whiskey short of just the barrel driving 100% of everything. If you try to cut clean for a bourbon, that barrel is going to drive 100% of everything all the time. Okay, so there really isn't a commonly narrowly cut brand, is what I'm trying to say. And bear this in mind for large column still distillers. They're not making cuts in the way that we do on pot stills at all. But also for pot still distillers, if anyone was doing real narrow cuts and they were actually doing a full-size barrel maturation program, or let's say even a 25 or 30 gallon barrel maturation program, and they were cutting super clean, they wouldn't still be in business, because you just don't get the characteristics that you expect out of a bourbon when you cut clean like that. It just the oak will overwhelm everything. So you then went on to ask here, do the cuts have to be ultra narrow for smooth white dog? So if you're making white dog or a white spirit, yes, you want tight cuts, very tight cuts, right? But very rarely are you ever going to make a white dog from a mash that would normally be a bourbon mash to be its own product. Now, I've done that. I did it at Spirits of French Lick, and I say this because white grain whiskey does not sell in the United States. It does not move at all. And for any of you home distillers, such as yourself, etc., you guys know that if you didn't grow up accustomed to the flavor of a grain whiskey, a white grain whiskey, you're probably not going to like it as a white whiskey. Or if you've not really matured your palate, you're not going to like it. 9 out of 10 people, I guarantee you, if I took about to sneeze, I apologize. If I took a Sugar Shine white dog with the same grains, but with sugar for the fermentation base, and set it next to a white dog made out of 100% grain, 9 out of 10 people aren't going to like either one of them. This is 9 out of 10 average people. But the one person that likes one of them is likely to like the Sugar Shine base better than he is to like the grain whiskey base. It's more accessible. It's people are more familiar with that. The power of food is strong. Triggering that in your mind, as Jesse says, that grandma sugar bowl thing, you may not even recognize the smell when you smell it, but your brain goes, there's something about comfort here, right? And a well-made Sugar Shine can be very, very enjoyable, truthfully, to some people. So let's get into the other question here. So what is the typical proof range for wide cut bourbon and narrow cut bourbon? All right, so I'm going to talk pot still here, because pot still is what I do. So when I make bourbon, and it depends on the still, and it depends on the distillery, and it depends on the specific gravity and all the other things, as you know, all the variables that go into making whiskey. So we're going to use Old Homestead as an example. When I start distilling bourbon at Old Homestead and I'm on my doubling run where I'm going to make my cuts at, typically my proof off of the still starting up is going to be about 165, 167, somewhere in there. I am not going to be close to my hearts until I'm probably dropped to, let's say, 158 to maybe 160 proof. If I'm making something that is going to go into a barrel for at least 4 years, that I want to hold up with the idea of holding on to some of that characteristic of the grain, the yeast, etc., I'm going to basically be looking, as I'm cutting the still, I'm going to be tasting and smelling, and what I'm going to be looking for is the transition between acetaldehyde, or nail polish remover, and ethyl acetate. Nail polish remover is very, very bright, very in your face. Ethyl acetate's more earthy. And what I'm looking for is that minute that brightness from the acetaldehyde goes away, the ethyl acetate kicks in. The ethyl acetate then will start to let some of those grain notes through. The second I smell the grain notes, discernible grain notes, corn, oats, etc., that's where I'm making my cut. Typically going to be around 158 proof. In my tails, now the stills at Old Homestead are interesting because they have, the doubling still has an 1.5 inch line arm, and it goes straight up in the air off the still about 2.5, 3 feet. There's a lot of forced reflux there, and you have to really practice temperature control where you can, or at least have an understanding of what you're doing to figure out where the cuts were. And you can ask Tyler Richardson and my dad. It threw me off a little bit when we first started distilling bourbon there, because it moved the normal cut point. So on these stills, typically the cut point to tails is going to be right around 110 proof, 110 to 115. Right when I go from that bright, beautiful grain, hearts sort of characteristic over to just a little bit of vegetative sort of characteristic, I'm going to start really paying attention to where my cuts are. I'm not going to actually make the cut in the tails until that little bit of vegetative goes full vegetative. The second it goes full vegetative, cut in the tails. At French Lick, because it was different, I can tell you that the tails proof was closer to, on a bourbon, would be closer to 88 proof. What's happening at Old Homestead is because that high riser, that high line arm, I'm getting more reflux, especially in the wintertime. So I'm getting compression, just like if I were running some plates, or just like if I was running some forced reflux without any plates. I'm compressing that alcohol a little bit more, so I'm getting a little higher proof. I see this in the average of my hearts as well. So the average of hearts at Old Homestead is 140 proof. The average of hearts at Spirits of French Lick was 135 proof. Everything else being the same. If I use the same yeast strains, if I use the same grains, it still work out exactly the same way. 140 at Old Homestead, 135 at Spirits of French Lick. That's pretty much my protocol for making bourbon. I want some of that stuff in there that you would not ever want to drink in a white spirit. I want some of those aromas in there that you'd never want to drink in a white spirit. I want some of those flavors in there you'd never want to drink in a white spirit, because I'm not going to make a white spirit out of it. I'm going to run it through another alchemical process in that barrel. I said before on the channel, I think, that barrels are fantastic ingredients and really shitty storage devices. And that's the best way to look at a barrel. A barrel is an ingredient, right? Just like black pepper is an ingredient. A little bit of it's good, a lot of it's bad. Could be bad, depending on what you like. Right? Now, if I'm going to make something narrow, let's say for shits and giggles, I was going to go into a 10-gallon barrel. I'd probably go all the way out of that ethyl acetate. I'd probably be dropping closer to like 155 proof or something like that for my heads cut. And I might be setting closer to, at Old Homestead, 120 proof for the tails cut. I might, at Spirits of French Lick, be setting closer to 92 proof for the tails cut. So that gives you an idea of what those ranges are there anyways. So, all right, guys, that's going to wrap it up for this video. I got one more I'm going to film this evening. And check out thealchemistcabinet.com for all the updates on the Practical Distillers and Alchemist. I forgot what I was even saying. The Practical Distillers and Alchemist Almanac. There's the word I was looking for. And check out If You Have Ghosts, You Have Everything. Also, be on the lookout. As I said, Tyler Richardson and I are going to be starting a podcast here shortly. It'll probably be the Sacred and Profane Podcast. We'll probably use that title. I don't know when that'll start up, but it'll be very shortly. Love y'all. Later.